Calling the meeting to order. Good evening and welcome to the West Hartford Public Schools Board of Education regular meeting. It is Tuesday, March the 1st, and we will begin with our call to order. Charlotte, may you please give the roll call?
Dr. Chang.
Here.
Mr. Goldman.
Here.
Dr. Harris.
Here.
Ms. Nazarella.
Present.
Ms. Poland.
Here.
Dr. Steinberg.
Here.
Dr. Thomas Farquharson.
Here.
Student Representative Andrew Maglio.
Present.
Student Representative Avery Woods Weber.
Here. Andrew, may you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We do not have a revision to the agenda order, and now is the time for our public communications. This is where we're able to hear from you, your thoughts, your suggestions. We ask that whatever may be shared is shared in a respectful way. Please be mindful that as we are attentively listening, it is policy of the board that we do not respond. So although we are not responding to what you are saying, we certainly are aware and attentively listening. Each person has 3 minutes to make their comments and up to 21 minutes per subject matter. And as you are speaking, please be mindful of lovely Charlotte, who will hold up a yellow card when you are down to 1 minute. And when your time has expired, a red card will be presented, cueing for you to please wrap up and gracefully take your seat. We have so far just one name on the list. We have Addie Lorden. If you would please come to the podium, and all of those who are going to be speaking, please share your name and your address.
Good evening. My name is Addie Lorden and I live at 561 Park Road here in West Hartford. I've just served Mr. Moore as Superintendent and you, Ms. Farquharson, FOIA for some financial information from Webster Hill, and I expect it to be followed to the letter and responded to in time. I had other things to speak of tonight, but I'm going to put them aside. I've been asking questions since last February. I've been fobbed off, I've been intimidated, I've been bullied, and today I saw that my friends telling me that when you speak up and you ask questions, you will be intimidated, you will be bullied. Worse, today I witnessed our children will be targets. So I will no longer seek answers in this room. I will no longer seek answers at your office, Mr. Vicinis. You can wink at me all you like. Really? Fine. I'll be going outside of the state. Good evening. Nice.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to make a comment? Any other persons that would like to make a comment, or possibly in the overflow room? Okay, we will continue on. Next on the agenda is unfinished business, but we do not have any at this time. And we now will go to new business. And with that, we will receive the presentation of the Superintendent's 2022-2023 budget recommendations. And with that, the recommendation is that the Board of Education receive the Superintendent's recommended 2022-2023 education budget and begin the process of reviewing and modifying for final approval and adoption as the Board of Education budget at the April 5th, 2022 Board of Education meeting. So before Superintendent Moore does present, just want to remind all of our colleagues here that we so very much look forward to what will be shared. And this is the presentation. As we know, we have a robust schedule for the remainder of the month. And at those times, that's when we will have more granular detail, be able to ask more questions and engage more in the process. But today, we certainly do welcome the initial presentation, and passing it off to you, Mr. Moore.
Thank you very much. So there's two pieces tonight's presentation that we've kind of folded in because we've had such a busy calendar, and both will be posted separately on the website for people's information. The first half, I'm going to run through a state of the schools as we do, and we talk about where we are now versus where we were 5 years ago, and then where we were 20 or so years ago, looking at how West Hartford had shifted. It's really an important piece of information for us to look at always. The budget document and the development of the budget is about the future, about what we plan for our children, not just for next year, but investments in new programs, sometimes investments in new ideas. You know what? One of my favorite sayings about a budget is, if you want to find out a district, a town, a country's priorities, look at how they spend their money. And I'm very proud of how we spend our money. I think we're one of the more efficient districts when you look at what we put into it and the excellent education that our children receive, and the value that is repaid for that through home prices in towns. If we've seen as we've seen such a robust market, specifically in West Hartford, over the past couple years. Before I get into either presentation, I have to thank Liz Hewitt and the people in her office who put together. You all have a budget in front of you. This is all public information, and Liz works incredibly hard year-round. We start the year meeting every Tuesday about this. Liz, Andy Moore, and myself. Then we follow through with meeting with principals, about department heads, going through the kind of things that we might need to see. Those meetings go on at schools, and then the information keeps filtered through to the executive team until the point where, for the past few weeks, Liz has the misfortune of basically she and I spending day after day together with Andy. So the big thing about this is that to come in and look at a budget and try to be an expert as a volunteer, as you all are, is immensely difficult. The one thing I'd tell you, on your first page, Liz has put together a blue piece of paper that says, read this first. What I've learned from Liz is just do what Liz tells me to do, and I'm better off. And it describes the executive summary that's included, the workshop summaries where we'll go in depth, and the members of my team will go in depth in more granular detail, whereas today's as Lorna said, the more overall view of the entirety of the budget. And then the sections of the budget detail the various programs within our schools, divided in that way. So a lot of work's gone into that we're obviously very proud of. Paul, do you have the presentation? So do we have a okay. You'll click? Okay. All right, if you can go to the next slide. All right, so looking through, this is the history of our buildings that we utilize in West Hartford. And as we can see, we have buildings that are approaching their 100th birthday. When we look at some, when we talk about renovation, we're talking about major renovation shifts. There's been work done in all of the buildings during time. As you know, that's how we upkeep with the capital improvement plan every year. But those are the major renovations. And truthfully, Duffy's had some interior renovations over time. We had classroom needs. You'd renovate locker rooms, actually turned into learning spaces at different points. And that's gone on at a lot of our buildings with the internal areas. But, it's interesting because you can track the history of West Hartford by tracking when the schools were built. And you can almost track housing patterns in town. And you can even track migration patterns into town, when they happened and who was coming in and what that meant for those neighborhoods. So just an interesting thing to look at, because Charter Oak is our newest building, obviously. for that Bristow, and then you see a rather significant gap with any buildings in the town. So even our third youngest building is as old as I am. So there we go. All right. It would be impossible to talk about the state of the schools and not mention COVID-19, where we are now and where we've been. We see, I think that anybody that makes the mistake of saying we're done with COVID now, that's obviously foolhardy. We're not. We all know that, we acknowledge that. We're in a period that we hope is a very extended down period of COVID-19. We hope that it continues in perpetuity, but we prepare for mitigation strategies in case that's not the case. I do want to point out that since the beginning of COVID, and this is really a thanks to Andy, a thanks to so many of our administrators that are in the building, and thanks to our nursing staff, because the work that has gone on in a district like ours to track 7,000 exposures, quarantines, possible cases, which resulted in 2,900 positive cases over that time that we've tracked for our students and staff since the beginning of COVID. We provided 52,000 masks to students and staff at this point, and we still have thousands more for anybody that needs them. In addition to that, through Project Detect COVID, we've conducted over 16,000 COVID tests since October. I would be surprised of our students, I would be surprised if there's any district that has provided more tests. I don't think there is, because we were one of the earliest adopters, one of the first to be doing any testing, and we still maintain about a caseload of about 900 tests a week currently. This is being expanded. Andy sent a message out to staff yesterday that now will include staff in Project COVID Detect. So any staff member that wants weekly testing as part of this can have that. In addition to that, we've dispersed and will continue to distribute up to 30,000 home tests to families and staff. We just picked up 22,000 more to go out to families and staff members that need them. So anybody, it's the same process we've done before. We've communicated through our schools with families. Best way to stay safe is, of course, to stay home if you're not feeling good, and to do testing to make sure where you are with COVID. Enrollment trends, you've seen this because we just presented on this a couple weeks ago, but I've been spending some time really looking at this trend and trying to match it to national demographic trends. When I look at this, and when you see communities increase and we talk about, and Chip Ward was here and he talked about the baby boom and the baby boom echo, and as both of those led to those increases in time. When you look at these kind of declines that happen out over those, they tend to be a 13 to 15 year decline in those periods before stabilization and increase. And actually it matches, if you look at ours, it was about a 14-year decline till we saw a stabilization increase. We're actually, if you look at peak and kind of declining, we're in the 11-year period now or so. And I'm not saying it's going to match it, and as you know, Chip projected a 10-year continued decline. I will say that I've learned over time not to continuously disagree with Chip about things, because he certainly knows a lot of things that I don't. Except with the pattern that we saw this year, that it wasn't just increased kindergarten because of COVID, because we've continued to see families move in throughout the school year in patterns we've never seen before, not at least during my time, that we haven't seen before. So I wouldn't be surprised if that decline, that slow decline that's projected, that goes on past, that Chip talked about previously when we did long-term enrollment trends, I wouldn't be as surprised to see that even flatter than what's projected. Now, comparison of enrollment by race. This is really interesting because it tracks the changes in West Hartford Public Schools. And when you look at it, you can see that you could look at it, if you just look at raw numbers, okay? you could track that our population numbers, the decline in enrollment is really a decline in white student enrollment during that time, as we've seen shifts in the population of West Hartford. But it's not as simple to say, well, white people left, because that's not actually the case. There's been an influx of people, and you see two or more races, you see how that didn't exist 20 years ago. And you see how that number continues to increase over time. Those people did exist, there was just no state categorization. We use the categorization that's used by the state. Okay, so this one, and I've got to thank Liz because she hit on something that I think is very clever as we welcome our town manager. I hope he's not here trying to intimidate me with budget numbers or something, because it won't work, Mr. Ledwith. But, so this is that previous slide by numbers, but this is by percentages. And the percentage of our students, so we've gone from a 72.4% of our student population was white to currently 56.4% of our population is white. And then when you look at Hispanic, obviously see a large increase. Asian, you see an increase. Black student population has held pretty steady over the past 22 years or so. And then you see two or more raises again. But Liz very cleverly pulled for me the census of July of 2021, and when Liz and Andy and I were looking at it, and Andy hit on it exactly, the schools are 20 years ahead of the town. Because listen to the numbers from the July 2021 census and match where they fit here. So in the July 2021 census, the percentage of the West Hartford community, not the school community, but West Hartford overall, that's white, is 73%. The percentage of the West Hartford community overall that's Hispanic is 10.2%. The percentage of the West Hartford community that's Asian overall is 7.9%. The percentage of the West Hartford community overall that's black is 6%, and two or more raises is 2.8%. It's just a fascinating comparison that the town is where the schools were 20 years ago, pretty much, with some slight shifts in some areas, but overall, just kind of a remarkable pattern. We often say, and I feel like our kids are ahead of us. And really, in our community, that holds true when you compare the entire community's numbers versus our school student population. Now, percentage of students eligible for free and reduced lunch. And I have to point one thing out. Obviously, the numbers have doubled over 20 years, and you can say, well, it's less than doubled. Last year, if you recall, that number is 27%. We have a problem right now in capturing our free and reduced lunch. It's not unique to West Hartford. It's basically every school in the country. Because of the free lunch program being expanded to all, because of COVID, people are not filling out the forms in the same way. 25% of the population has filled out those forms. We assume we're still missing, even though we've tried to get those people that haven't filled out the forms, it's somewhere between 3 and 5% of our population that hasn't filled out the forms because there's not, or they don't see a direct benefit to it, typically at the younger levels. At the older levels, at high school, there are some benefits you can get to it in terms of just other things that you have to pay for as a high school student that don't come up in elementary. So that number, I would expect, if the federal government shifts free and reduced lunch, I would expect that number to increase. But I still have to point out here, what does free and reduced lunch mean? In West Hartford, everywhere else in the country, free lunch for a family of 4 means an income of $34,450 for the whole family. $34,450. Reduced lunch, slightly under $49,000 for a family of 4 in West Hartford. And that represents somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of our student population. Anybody that, I do, there's things that we have to look at in society. There's things we have to look at where they try to track by need, and sometimes West Hartford's grouped with areas of wealthy suburbs, and certainly West Hartford has its wealth. But when that percentage of your population, and again, student population may be different than town population as we look at. But we have significant need in this community, and our kids come to school with that need. And if kids are not fed, and if they don't have those basic securities taken care of, learning becomes impossible. Enrollment by dominant home language. We have this year 77 different home languages spoken in West Hartford homes. Always one of my favorite slides to have because it shows kind of different, again, those kind of demographic patterns that you don't necessarily expect. Look at Arabic over the past, 5 years, 6 years. The number of Arabic speakers has doubled. And that's reflected in our schools. I will tell you that in the future, I will be stunned if in the near future we don't see Arabic as a language within our middle and high schools. And I would argue we'd be doing a disservice to our community if at some point we don't see that. It's one of the more valued languages for students to have a background in a lot of areas. Portuguese, we've had a huge influx over the past few years in students from Brazil, and that's reflected there. And of course, Nepali, from no students that spoke Nepali 20 years ago to a vibrant Nepalese community in town. And Russian was the second largest language spoken in 2000. In the 1990s, it was larger than that after you saw so much out emigration from the fall of the Soviet Union in the late, basically starting around 1990 to 2000, West Hartford became a large center for movement for the Russian community that has declined over the past few years. And then all other, the difference with the all other now versus 20 years ago is that a lot more make up the all other than used to. It used to be in the 40 to 50 languages spoken, and now, again, we're at 77. Percentage of English language learners, we see this dramatic increase in the past 6 years. If we look at number of students, 2000 it was 423 ELL students, 2015 it was 474, 2021 it was 585. I can tell you this year in 2022 it's 651. So we've seen a larger increase from last year to this year than we did from 2000 to 2015. Significant numbers of students moving into our community with a different home language other than English. Certified staff, one of the goals, one of the things that we've worked hard of, Rick led with when he was Director of Human Resources for the past 8 years. Every year in our hiring, we've hired at least 25% of the staff that we've hired have been people of color. We're closing that gap, but it's clearly happening slowly, and incremental growth is painful. And we're hoping that programs we put in place, like Future Educative Diversity, should start paying off this coming year. And we'll have our own graduates coming back and teaching for us and working for us as we go into the future. This is certified staff, so this is basically teaching staff, administrative staff. If we include non-certified staff, that number's about 20%. If we include non-certified staff, so if you include paras, TAs, and custodial staff. Now, one of the things that shifted over time that you could take a whole course. You could take multiple courses and get a master's and then a doctorate in historical trends of special education over time. But it has been a dramatic 10-year period in shifts in special education. If you look at a prevalency rate in Connecticut as a state over that time period, you saw that special education prevalency went from 11.6% of students in Connecticut 10 years ago to 16.3% in the state last year. Now, West Hartford sees a similar trend, continuing over to well over 16% within our public schools when we include our outplaced and students that are responsible for through parochial schools, over 17% in the parochial and private schools, and I'll talk about that later. But this is one of those things that national numbers can sometimes lie. There are states that capped, and I'll name the state, Texas, named a cap of 10%. And for an 8-year period, said that only 8% of students can be special education. They lost a major lawsuit last year that could cost the state anywhere from $2 billion to $100 billion, depending on compensatory services. So a major factor here. Now that'll be held up in court for years, and it doesn't get talked about enough, but it's actually a rather egregious abuse of education in this country. When we look at specialized programming, we have programs we didn't used to have. We have BCBAs, behavioral specialists, a job that didn't exist in this district 8 years ago. We have programs that you know of like Strive, but intensive behavior programs, school engagement programs, things that we are responsible for that schools in the past weren't responsible for. And I don't say that to begrudge it. I say that I'm very proud of our programs that meet our kids' needs. I am still exceptionally proud that parents of children with special needs call and visit during the summer and meet with our principals and go through our schools, because the reputation is out there that West Hartford will take care of your child and make sure that your child is treated just as any of us would want our child treated educationally. But that doesn't mean there aren't growing mental health and behavioral needs coming out of this pandemic, which we all know that's true. We've talked about it, we're upfront about it, we're honest about it, you see the ESSER funds being used in that way, which actually offset the budget, thankfully, because we have definitive needs, workers at all levels, social workers at all levels, additional crisis interventionists at high school, and additional behavioral specialist supports. But then if you look at the past 20 years, we have expansion of public school responsibility, and I shouldn't even say 20 years, because it's really a 10-year factor. Pre-K, preschool, I should say, students that are diagnosed with special needs or identified with special needs from birth to 3, there's state program, but at age 3 they become our students. And that's the reason for some of our pre-K programs. And it's interesting because they don't start the school year, it's not, well, I'm 2, but I'm going to turn 3, so I start pre-K. They enter pre-K at the age of 3. So if their birthday is tomorrow's their first day of school, which is why you'll see additions in our pre-K classrooms during the year, because as well as we can identify all those students, it's not 100%. And so sometimes those pre-K classrooms will see blossoming, and you can't really have a pre-K classroom get too big, as you can imagine, with kids that age. The other difference is in post-secondary now, we're responsible for kids through their 22nd birthday. And that's actually reflected in our FTE request, as we're adding another staff member at post-secondary, because we're responsible for another year of education. I've talked to our legislative delegation what happens to our special needs students and the unique pressures that families are under in that gap of what used to be after 21 years old now is after 22 years old. That's why, we're so proud of the bookstore and the work that we're trying to do to make sure these kids and families have work in the community, have connections in the community before they're finished with their time here. And then something that I don't think people necessarily realize is that we're responsible for private, parochial, and magnet school individual education plans, and to hold PPTs with them and make their educational plan for the year. And so we have an administrator that spends much of her time out in those schools, working with those schools and working with those families to develop the plans for them. When we look at enrollment by special education need, this is all students. We're including outplacements because we're paying for those students. We're including pre-K and we're including post-secondary. We're at 17.5% of our students now. And this relates to all of our students, But I do want to go back to that private parochial school number. We have 114 students now that we're responsible for their education, their special programming, and to identify their program, identify their needs, to meet with the families and with the school, but they're not in our school at that point. So that's 114 students. Comparison of staffing by type over time. You see those needs that I just spoke about reflected in special ed increases in staffing. See that from 2015 to 2021. When you look at our general education staffing, don't forget, pre-K didn't exist in the numbers before 2015 that it did now. Graduate programs did not exist in the same way that they do now. So a lot of those numbers are reflected here. Now, how is this affected by the greater world going on out there? This is a reflection of what's happened in Connecticut in demands on curriculum and the kind of things that we have to be responsible for. And I'd point to graduation requirements. Our students have to take more courses, which means there has to be more teachers for those courses. And that's reflected in our FTE numbers on the general education level. Comparison of average class size. This has been a major focus of the district since about 2009. 2009, a lot of people were elected to the Board of Education 2009, 2010 with the express purpose of lowering class size in West Hartford. This has been a focus of every Board of Education since I've been superintendent to try to make sure class sizes are kept at a reasonable level. Certainly, the pandemic has accelerated that. As you'll see, this year we have the smallest elementary class sizes we've ever had. ESSER helps that. And this is one of those things that, again, this is going to be one of those pressures. We talked before about kids will be seniors that haven't paid for pay for play. We'll have families that have been in school kindergarten, first grade, second grade that have had exceptionally small classes. And then they'll go into third grade, the ESSER money runs out, and that's a decision for the board to make. How small are you going to keep the class sizes? And there will be, just because we know there always was throughout my career, pressure to keep those class sizes smaller, and that'll be something that you will have to address. High school stayed relatively similar over all of that time. Middle school, we've seen a decline over the past 20 years, but overall our averages are smaller. AP Equity and Excellence. This is the percentage of our students who got a 3 or better in the previous year on a AP exam. Now we can say, well, why do we look at that? Why is this important? This is something that over my career people have talked about, and I always use the phrase challenging coursework, that we should be having challenging coursework. Why? Because kids say they want to go to college. A large percentage of our students talk about college as an ultimate goal. If they're going to go to college, why aren't we preparing them with the most rigorous coursework that they can? I will tell you that out of 100, this is current numbers, out of 100 ninth graders nationally, 44 will go on to college. Okay, so 44 will go on to college. Their families will make that investment. Only 21 of those 44 will finish with a bachelor's degree. So more than half will have spent money that doesn't end necessarily in a bachelor's degree. Now, it could end in an associate's degree. I'm not saying it's wasted time at all. But the most important predictor of college success, beyond anything else when you compare it for a high school student starting in ninth grade, is their rigorous high school experience. How rigorous was their coursework? That tells you whether a child's going to make it through those 4 years. It makes sense when we look at it. But that, according to research, is the most important thing. We offer a very rigorous high school experience at Conard and at Hall. Percentage of advanced placement exams with the score of 3 or better. We are so far above the state average. We are so far above the national average. And what's stunning about that is we've opened our AP courses to everybody, as you all know. In 2000, it was only those people that had met all those prerequisites, and basically 80% of them got a 3 or better on an AP exam. We're almost at 80%, the exact same numbers, with everybody being welcomed into those courses. That's 1,600, in 2021, 1,645 students received a 3 or higher. 1,645 exams were a 3 or higher. It becomes important. I want to look at the next slide and I'll come back to that. So let's look at the other college experience courses that we don't always talk about here, and we should. Because there's advanced placement, okay, course enrollment for our students. And then there's UConn Early College Experience course enrollment. Those are unique courses. Then there's Capital Community Prep course enrollment. Okay, so we had 1,645. We said exams receiving a 3 or higher, okay? 1,645 students. It was students, not exams. Let's look that out. If each of those is a UConn course, that's $1,500 per course. Our students earn the equivalent of $2.467 million in college courses being replaced by what they took now. And I'll get to the fact that it's not a pure replacement. UConn Early College Experience, we've almost 200 times, five times, the number of students taking an early college experience course over the past 6 years. Again, basically the same number, another $2.3 million in coursework being done in our schools that replaces that work. And then Capital Community Prep course enrollment, if we make that a $500 course cost, you're looking at another $700,000 saved there. Real money. And we could say, well, kids are still going to go, that just gets them out of class. Yes, it's not a one-for-one dollar. But then you look at the opportunity cost. I can't tell you, and it just so happens, my son's a senior in college, as many of you know, the number of his friends that have graduated early and are now working, that are in New York or Boston, that have already started their careers because they were able to graduate in mid-year because of the credits they had earned in West Hartford schools. Or you look at the experience my own son has now, where he's working on a thesis now, he's getting ready for graduate school, he's only taking 4 credits this semester. And those kind of benefits that come up, kids that need to work in college that can only take 4 credits, but then they'll work to offset that. This is real. When you look at this all together, we're talking about $6 million of possible offsets because of our rigorous course experience that our students have. Our students graduating in 4 years, this is something we obviously want to be 100%. And we're working to get there, and we track the biggest thing that we've seen, 9th grade on track for graduation. And we've invested heavily and focused on making sure we identify everybody in 9th grade by mid-year and at the end of the year. Are you on track to graduate? Because you've got to get them on track as soon as possible. What's interesting is we're seeing this increase, but we're seeing more requirements, more credits. So this is a tenuous number to get through in 4 years. It's going to be very difficult for some kids with special education requirements and otherwise to complete this in a 4-year period. But that is a exceptional number for any district the size of West Hartford that looks like West Hartford to be at over 95% of our students completing high school within 4 years. And then we talk about the excellence of our staff, and I'm just continuously impressed. And I'm not going to go through all of these, and gosh, trying to pick 12 or 13 when you're talking about, we could have done page after page after page of the honors and acknowledgments that our teachers and leaders have received over the past few years, and they inspire me as their colleague to try to work harder and be better for them and to live up to their legacy. Really, just an unbelievable staff here in West Hartford. And our students, and this is again, they're just trying to pick some things out. You look at our athletics, are the best they've ever been at our two high schools. I mean, I went through my time at Conard, and I will tell you that there weren't a lot of state titles there, and Mr. Duarte during his time got quite a few, far surpassed by Dan Zatoun at Hall, though, with who has developed a cross-country and track powerhouse. And music, we go back to, because these are the numbers, just how exceptional our musicians are, the arts program, and then the academics. And these are individual awards, but gosh, you have 193 college AP scholars with distinction in 1 year. That's a decade's worth for many districts. And again, more students in West Hartford graduate with college credit than in any other community in the state of Connecticut. So that leads into, that's where we are. That's this community. So where are we going? This slide duplicative, but just to remind us, we have over 9,000 students in district. 44% are students of color, significant non-English home language, talked about free and reduced lunch, talked about special education. One of the things to point out on that last bullet, West Hartford Public Schools educates 1.9% of the public school students in Connecticut. We're basically 2% of the kids in school in Connecticut go to West Hartford Public Schools. We receive 1% of the education cost share funding provided by the state of Connecticut. Historical perspective, and this is something that I'm happy with. It's one of those slides that's like, I've always been torn about this slide because I'm proud of the efficiency over the years of how well we've been educating our children with declining resources, and I'm thankful to the board that vis-a-vis the rest of the state over the past 6 years, we are not declining in our spending anymore, but actually increasing in comparison to other districts because we have unique needs and because we're different than other communities. We're 100th this past year in educational spending per pupil expenditures. I'd point out that in 2000-2001, we were 77th, so dropped a little since then. In 90-91, we were 34th. In 80-81, we were 3rd. And you look at that, we were basically a top 10 per pupil expenditure for pretty much a 20-year period and before that. Now, the net current expenditure per pupil, West Hartford net current expenditure per pupil is $19,155 this year. Now, the DIRG B average, District Reference Group B, this was developed about 20 years ago, and it's a very poor comparison because these are supposed to be the towns that we share characteristics with, and when you look at them, we don't really share characteristics with them, but we don't shy away from that comparison with them. We believe we have an excellent school system, and we want families that are choosing where to live to choose West Hartford. And if we spent at what the DIRG B average is, the budget would be $2.6 million more. We're $2.6 million fewer than what the average would be. If we take that over the 17 to 21 time period, we'd have had to spend over $40 million more to match the average expenditure in DIRG B. We use the state median. The reason between the state median and the average is because there's so many exceptionally small districts that it throws off the average, because if you're in a tiny, tiny district, you could have an average expenditure of $50,000 a student, which doesn't really make sense. But you look at the state median, to spend at the state number, we'd need $6.3 million more this year. And over the past 5 years, it would be $28.2 million more we would have needed to spend. And what do we get for that? You know, because there's often a question about, well, it costs more for our schools every year. Yes, it does. Inflation costs more for our schools. But since I've been using a 2000 comparison, in 2000, the homes that sold in West Hartford, the one-family homes, sold for an average of $179,900. If I use 2011, you want to go 10 years ago, it was $295,000. When we had a stagnation period, 2015's number we've been using, I'll tell you in 2015, it was $295,800. Last year, the average one-family home in West Hartford sold for $360,000. So this increase is rather dramatic. And when people are asked, why do they want to live in West Hartford? I don't think I need to say why they say they want to live in West Hartford. But it's not the restaurants, no matter how lovely they are. It's our schools. Fiscal year 2023 budget by category. When we look at, this is going to be basically a similar pie chart every year. We are a people organization. When we talk about what do we have, what does our money go on, our money goes directly in the classroom, in the person of our teachers and the people that work for our schools. 83% of the funds go to salaries and benefits. That's where at the point when people talk about what are you going to cut, it's people. If you want to save money in a budget, it's people at this point, and programming. Transportation is out there because it's slightly higher, went up 1%. But that 1%, even that, if you remember, last year we used $750,000 from the non-lapsing account into the transportation account. So that accounts for a lot of that increase in transportation this year because we don't have a non-lapsing account. So what does this year's budget look like? Okay, so if we just rolled forward the budget, just did the exact same thing next year that we did last year, it would be a $7.22 million increase or a 4.1% increase. Salaries are increasing slightly over $4 million overall. That's a 3.67% increase. 83% of this is people, so that's going to be a dominant number that's going to color all that we do. We do have more staffing this year to meet student needs, and then we had a new collective bargaining agreement that was passed unanimously by the board, negotiated by board members this previous fall. Medical expenses, we are budgeting an increase of $1.76 million, which is a plus 7.65% increase. This is an increase we didn't see coming. This is an outlier. We are in the state partnership plan. They estimate that the increase next year will be 8%. So why is that in the state partnership plan, and should we regret that we joined the state partnership plan? I would remind you that last year, health premiums went down 1.7% in the state partnership plan, and this was a budget driver in the good direction last year. Even the year before that, health premiums went up less than 1%. So what explains that? A lot of people didn't have things done, procedures done, exams, all of those things during the time of COVID that came back, and so they're projecting this increase. Pension and other obligations, the town sold pension obligation bonds. That reduces our obligation to the town $440,000. So that results in a decrease overall. Transportation expenses will increase $640,000 plus almost 7%. There's a 3% cost escalator in our contracts. Our transportation contracts have another year remaining on them. And we also have additional busing and transportation, almost all tied into special education. Requirements that basically, we can't do anything about those transportation costs, anything with special education. Tuition expenses increase by $810,000. This is a significant increase. We have a number of student outplacements increasing. We have increasing tuition rates, and of course is affected by the capped state reimbursement. So for a student outplacement, we're reimbursed up to 4.5 times our average student cost, so over $19,000 that we saw. In the state plan originally, they reimburse you for 100% over that, except the state just adopts a flat number for that, and then it's divided up about by the number of basically students it has, so districts get a different number. I can tell you we're up around 80% this year, which it sounds like 80% you're getting shortchanged 20%. There's been years I reported this when we were in the 50s, so I'm actually very, very happy with the 80% at this point. All other expenses, when we get into the minutia of the budget, we'll see these, but again, it's about a $90,000 increase when we look at positives and negatives there. So modifications that we made to try to make the budget more palatable. We take our responsibility to our taxpayers very seriously. We understand the difficult times. This inflation affects us also. We want to make sure that we come at a number that we can educate our children appropriately while respecting the difficult times that many of our families are in. Enrollment changes. Basically at the high school, because of declining enrollment, we can decrease about 6.8 positions at the high school level because we see that bubble as it's come through and it's beginning to affect the high school. So we look at that number that we can get some savings there. Special education, I mentioned before that we're going to have to hire for the post-secondary program, and that's that position there with those needs. Policy and economic factors, this is, in the budget is $500,000 for teaching assistant pay. That's an increase of $20 per day for our teaching assistants that work in our schools every day. It's something that you're going to have to look at, but you know that we have had trouble with those positions, filling those positions. There's times we don't have a choice, so we actually have to contract out, which costs us far more in that case for those positions. In addition, we'd like to increase substitute pay $10 per DM. And we do want to see a separation between our TA pay and our substitute pay. The people that commit to us that they're going to be here every day, they deserve a larger commitment in salary from us. Not anything against our substitutes. I greatly appreciate the substitutes and all the work they've done. But that would be a $10 per day increase for substitutes. Now, these large increases, however, are offset by the additional $440,000 benefit we're getting from the open choice program and the increase that the state's proposed in the governor's budget in open choice. West Hartford is a proud partner with open choice. West Hartford accepts more students from open choice than any other district in the state. And we continue, we just filled out our declaration today to welcome more students in next year and continue our partnership with the families of Hartford. And the work that Rosine has done in this area has been tremendous. But there's a benefit to it too in real spending and real money coming back to us. Non-classroom, again, these are small things we'll look at once we get into the budget. And then overhead reductions, basically to offset the increase in the state partnership plan, we are going to use $1.75 million from the health reserve, which that's why this program exists. We've built this reserve up over time to offset health insurance costs and increase when we have a bad year. So that $1.75 million used from our reserve has a definite impact on our total budget. So total modifications equal $2.2 million from the roll forward. So the adopted budget for this year was $176.31 million. Roll forward increase would be a 4.1% increase, which would be $7.22 million. Changes that we've made result in $2.2 million less than the roll forward, a 1.3% decrease from that. Net increase of $5 million or a 2.8% increase. I'd point out that is way lower than inflation is right now. And the 2022-2023 recommended budget that you will start off with is $181.33 million. Next steps. Budget workshop number 1, March 9th, next week. And I always point out that the budget season is fascinating and that the first night of this, it's uncanny how often it's been snowing the night we've done this, but it's not tonight, thankfully. And then the last night when the budget's adopted, it's hot as heck in here and we're trying to get the windows open. It's the perfect timing for this. Then we have the board public hearing, March 23rd at 7 p.m. People come out, talk about the budget, we welcome their input. And immediately when the public hearing ends, we shift into budget workshop number 2. Now, budget workshop number 1 is where Paul, Andy, Liz, Melissa, Rosina will come forward and describe what these drivers are in the budget. We'll go into more minute detail and we'll be able to answer your very specific questions and go through that in the workshop. Budget workshop 2 is more of a cleanup and having this forward. And then the board budget adoption is April 5th, 2022. The only thing I've ever asked in the budget is that if we're talking about any significant cuts, I just ask that they're at least proposed or talked about by the 23rd, because I don't think it's fair for somebody who works for us to find out their position is getting cut the very day it gets cut. I meet with people in the years that we've had significant budget cuts. There's years where I've gone to every one of our public schools and met with all the staffs after school to talk to them about these are the possibilities. Anybody, I will meet with you face to face to talk to you about this. So if those things are going to come up, if they can come up between the 9th and 23rd, I think that's fair to our staff members who give so much to us to treat them and give them that respect of letting them know that this is something that could be discussed for them. Budget adoption here is April 5th, 2022. Now I turn it over to Mr. Ledwith and the town council. Remember, your budget, we can decide what we wish to spend. The town council is what allocates the funding. And so that goes through on the 25th. The town council can't go into the budget and do line item, and can't really question this. They could just cut X amount of dollars or add X amount of dollars. I've never seen that happen, but I've heard tell of it. So that's those are the next steps in our budget. As always, this is intended to clear the paths of our students that deserve bright futures. And one of the things that we don't do is put limits on them. And finances can sometimes put a limit on opportunities for our kids. And I'm very thankful that the board here, year in, year out, has stood up for our kids and our families, and our community has too. During my time as superintendent, I've never had a referendum on the school budget. I think people know that our boards have done diligent work on these. So again, thank you to all the administrators and everybody from our district to work so hard to put this together and make plans for our kids. And open to any questions about processes. Again, specifics, they'd be better with. I mean, I'm not bad. I know some, but you know.
Thank you so very much for that. So a lot to digest, teammates. Any high-level, broad questions for Mr. Moore? Deb.
Thank you. Thanks for this presentation, and actually this isn't so much a question as a comment, but if you go back one slide to the process slide again, just so the public knows, this budget and your presentation of the state of the schools are both on our website, or will be by tomorrow morning, I imagine.
Should be as we speak now, Craig's
All
putting them up
right,
on the
super.
website.
And I just want to make sure that the public sees when the public hearing is, so that's an opportunity for people to come forward and share their thoughts, in addition to emailing us. And we'll always appreciate hearing from you.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, Gail.
Can I ask a question about the presentation, or you want to hold that for
You can.
You can, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a question about the special education, which seems to be increasing every year, and I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about why that is. Why is that number going up?
Sure, it's because of prevalency with special education impact for our children. It's because we've become a destination for people with children with special needs to come to our community. It's also because no two special education identifications are the same, and even identifications, you take something as broad as a child living with autism and you try to break that down. There's no simple definition of that. So the resources that are required have become are just greater based on the population that choose to live in West Hartford. But there's one other piece with this, and I'm glad you asked the question, because sometimes people will just talk about, well, it's gotten so much more expensive, it's gotten so much more expensive. We're way better at it. I mean, we're way better at special education. I can tell you when I started teaching, I taught next door to what was called the socially emotionally disturbed classroom. And kids were there all day long with the same teacher. And that was at the high school. All day long. Room at the end of the hall. And now that just doesn't come about in the same way. We've taken down these two silos, that special education students are here and general education students are here. And students are more integrated. They spend more time with their non-disabled peers. What that requires, however, is far more direct intervention. So instead of putting 8 kids in a classroom together, those kids are out in the building, but that means those kids oftentimes will have a one-on-one aide or a one-on-two aide with those children so that they can access their education. And that's really what it comes down to, is how best can we make sure that a child can access their education? And that's what an IEP intends to do. Now, there are also legal issues that exist within Connecticut. Connecticut's one of 6 states that the burden of proof is on the district instead of on a family to prove a special education, both diagnosis and programming. So that shifts court costs and otherwise. So there's also legal costs that get involved with special education all the time, because people will ask, is that the best thing for my child? And we believe our programs are exceptionally good for people's children. There are cases with children that what that child needs we can't provide, not in our setting, could be our expertise, could be the setting overall, could be that child's unique needs, and that's why we have outplacements. And so those costs are unique. As we move through time, we have a significantly large number of outplacements also. But so much has shifted in special education in so many good ways. But yes, the incidence has increased. Does that mean there weren't special education kids 15 years ago, 20 years ago? No. It means they weren't identified in the same ways, and we considered them failing for a variety of reasons, and we didn't really meet their needs in the same way. So, a broad answer, but those are the key factors.
Other questions? Jason?
All right, Tom, thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering if you can go back to the slide of showing the curriculum changes.
Yes.
Yeah, the timeline there, yeah. So what I'm curious about is, so these are state level education, changes. Could you map over this district level changes to the curriculum? For instance, maybe when did the emphasis on AP, opening up the AP exams, and because I'm thinking about the ways that, on the one hand, some of the curricular changes generate needs for different staffing, right? You said that, okay, there's more requirements, but then what role has the district played in either, like district level changes, say to, those AP courses or incorporating ECE, and if that's, like to think of either the cost savings or the cost of a district level kinds of change?
Yeah, it's a good question. Certainly, I mean, I could talk through it a long way, but Paul and I can get something that looks more like that and report on that over the course of the year. I think one of the things, I'll tell you one of the shifts. I became principal at Connor in 2007. One of my goals is I couldn't stand on 8th grade parent night when kids were pulling their kids out of Connor to send them to some other high school. And that has been a focus on all of us since that time, where it used to be, well, we're the public school, you got to come here. And so really, how much are we selling ourselves? How much are we trying to convince you that what we're offering? And how much are we trying to be competitive? And I don't say that, but it is different than just, okay, everybody, here's your U.S. history course, you take this. You look at, during this time period, you'll see U.S. history through the African American experience. You'll see Chinese language added at the middle school and even the elementary school. You'll see really, there's this kind of idea that STEM has replaced everything. And you know, from in college, the liberal arts people, and I'm one of them, will say too much focus has been placed on STEM. We've gotten a lot better in STEM here, but gosh, we've invested in the humanities here in the same way. So I think that that would track over the same time. And part of that really relates to that more challenging coursework that comes about, and those courses that, I mean, some of the UConn Early College Experience coursework goes to, there's training so kids can become EMTs, and doing that for work at a young age with those certifications that come through. So certainly Paul and I can work on getting you a more direct layover of that, because I think it's a good question, interesting point maybe for a future presentation.
Yeah, thanks, because, there's, in some ways, if this was the only thing that we had to look at about the curriculum changes over time, I think we would miss those things that make the schools a driver, right? And then those kinds of district level changes drive also recruitment for teachers and.
Yeah, and I'd point out in 2010, we didn't have any reading specialists, or we had one or two. Now we have reading specialists in all of our buildings. And that's important because the science of reading is a science. And teaching reading is incredibly difficult. And so that reading specialist is not somebody that just exists for the students, but also with our staff. We see the same with math coaching and how we've invested in that in the elementary and middle school level. Those kind of things didn't happen, which are reinvestments in our own professional development of our teaching staff too.
Jason, okay, all right, sure. Claire?
Yeah, I just had a question with the ESSER funds and some of the benefits that we've had, especially with food, the free lunches. I feel that there may be a trend in an increase in free and reduced lunch applications when the lunches go away. A couple of reasons. One is there's not the stigma of applying. People have seen the benefit, and people have found out how good the lunches are. Families have also found out that it's a lot easier not to make the lunches, buy the food. So with that, does that increase state funding, or is that an extra budget increase?
Well, we're still waiting to see if the federal government will renew this program for next year. And some states have already announced that whether or not the federal government does, their state will. Our state hasn't said that yet. What happens in terms of state funding, this is really about, your question goes to a couple things in that. A couple years ago, we were at the point where the board had to fund our cafeteria services because cafeteria services wasn't breaking even, because we didn't have enough lunches being bought in the same way, but we still have the same number of employees. That problem's gone away. If what you say does happen, that will actually be a benefit to us, because we have the employees that we have to pay no matter what, because we have to provide the lunches. But if we're getting a higher lunch count, then that pays itself for our employee costs. So that would be a very good thing if it continues. State might have to pay more. It's really more of a federal program, though.
Other questions? Ethan?
I only had the chance to glance at the book, so it may be there. In your State of the State, if I got the title right, State schools, I'm sorry.
I borrowed it from somewhere anyway.
That's fine. You mentioned a couple of key strategic objectives, one being graduation rate, AP, I'm sure there's others, you mentioned STEM. Is there any way to align the strategic with the expenses? So for instance, we're putting an emphasis on math and science, and that would show where the costs are. I don't want to make it too complicated, but it would be great to see, okay, here's key objectives to us, like graduation rate. Here's where we're trying to be. I realize 100% is where you want. Probably not going to be a real objective. But just, to me, just to match them up together, and I realize I'm adding extra work.
No, I understand what you're saying. The truth is that when we have a special program, like I named math as a unique district focus 5 years ago, and we did do that, and we matched everything with it. The truth is, those goals right now, there's not a special goal other than student social emotional needs, as we've talked about, and so a lot of those ESSER funds are going to that. So in terms of like graduation rates, like that's basically the whole budget. Like it would just be a big arrow to those things. So nothing really follows a unique pattern here. And when you look at 83% are staffing costs and everywhere else, I wouldn't say that there's a direct correlation to any of those things. And that's one of the questions, and I'm glad you brought up, like people talk about advanced placement courses. If a kid's not taking an advanced placement course, they're taking a regular course. Advanced placement courses, the biggest idea people have is that they're more expensive to us. They're not. They cost the exact same as any other course because it's just a teacher in that classroom teaching it. There's a unique cost to the student to take the AP exam at the end of the course, but that is offset by those credits that they get.
No,
I don't mean that you're saying that, by the way. I'm saying that's come up over the years.
But it's just sort of, what are we trying to achieve? How do we define success?
Yeah, and that's in the board goals.
No, I understand, but graduating a kid, well, I guess you do want that, but you'd want them to do more than just show up for 4 years.
Absolutely. You can't graduate just showing up.
No, I understand. But my point is, how do we define success is what I was trying to get to.
Yeah, and the truth is, the difficulty with that is that's different for every student. I mean, that definition of success for a child that's working over at the bookstore tonight is very different than that definition of success is for Andrew. That definition of success for Andrew is different than it was for my daughter. And that's the truth, is that's individual education plans and special education. We've tried to map those out so that every student, as they go through high school, that school counselors are looking at what is that unique need for that student? What is the unique way that they go through? And the best way to do that is for our teachers to know those students individually. And so that when they're choosing their courses and choosing their coursework and getting advice on what does the future hold, that we have enough options for them that they can meet those unique needs.
Yeah, no, I understand. There's macro goals and there's micro goals. And so the two, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I got you.
All right. Other questions, comments? All right. Well, thank you so very much. We look forward to the workshops ahead and engaging in more discussion and dissection. So with that, we will continue on and moving to our staff communications and reports. So Mr. Moore, you don't get much of a break because it's now time for
That was it. You already heard it. We're good.
Superintendent's report. All right. And so with that, want to, if I may, speak to, we know an announcement was shared with our district. And we certainly know that that is something that we will be speaking and working through over the course of the next few months. And I'm speaking to the soon departure of our superintendent, Mr. Moore. So I will save the comments and the accolades and all of that for a later time. But do want to certainly acknowledge that, and also want to also recognize that we know that we want to begin the process of I can't say replacing, never replacing, but just having someone to step into your role. And so with that, would like for all to know that on March the 15th, the Board of Education will hold an executive session for reviewing statutes and options with our Board of Ed's attorney to inform the first steps in the superintendent search. So we don't want to prolong the process. We collectively want to come together again at our next regular Board of Ed meeting. We will have an executive session where we will begin to identify next steps, and then moving forward, we will make sure to share all of that with you as a public, and we certainly want for you to be a part of the process as well. So thank you for allowing that to be shared. We certainly did not want to dance around the elephant in the room, but we certainly see it there, and we will just put a ... for the time being. With that, moving to staff reports and board discussions, and I do not believe we have any at this time. And next, going to information and reports. Board members, anyone have any communications and reports that they would like to share and speak on? Routine matters, and I'm just skipping through again. Part of System More, you have me all flustered there. All right. And so with that, thank you so much, Dr. Steinberg. Approval of the minutes of the regular Board of Education meeting of February the 15th, 2022. The recommendation is that the Board of Education approve the minutes of this meeting. Is there a motion?
I make a motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All of those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes have it. Thank you so much. And now we shall move to information and reports. Board members, do we have any reports or communications to share from any boards that you may be on or things along those lines? All right, and other information and discussions. I do just want to briefly share, and you made reference to this, Mr. Moore, during your presentation, that on this past Saturday, there was a wonderful performance just down the hall in the auditorium, the Chocolate Cafe. And with the Chocolate Cafe, we had a composition of many of our music talents in the district, the Solista group, the First Strings from Sedgwick, Bristow Bows, and also West Hartford Camerata. And we are so thankful to the directors from Mr. Drake and Mr. Hopko and Ms. McSweeney for a wonderful performance. And this was the first time they were able to come together in a couple of years, because we certainly know the pandemic has hindered us from being able to do that. And it was quite a wonderful gathering and quite a proud moment for not only the parents, but I imagine the educators as well, for you to see your commitment in educating our youth and showing their talents in many ways. And to hear the music, the melody, golly, our children are so talented. And some of the adults, you could hear them saying, boy, they sound like professionals, and some better professionals that I've heard of. So just wanted to certainly highlight the accomplishments of that, and thank you to all of you for supporting our young people and acknowledging their talents and their strengths and encouraging for them to do more than just settling. And that was a wonderful opportunity. We know we have many more things coming down the pike as well, performances and plays, and our young people here will certainly update us on that. But just wanted to speak to the wonderful Chocolate Cafe experience. And with that, now we will move to non-staff communications. Yes, pardon me, yes, Jason. Absolutely.
Sorry for the interruption. I did want to report back on a program that happened at the Noah Webster House last week. And this was a presentation by the district invited from the Noah Webster House to discuss during Black History Month the formation, the development of the Black History, the African American history course offered in the high school. And just wanted to convey that Dr. Rosina Haskins was there, as well as curriculum developers, and we're able to answer questions from the public and also hear comments from legislators who championed the law. So it was a really proud moment to show the leadership that the district is playing in the implementation of this course, actually displayed on the timeline here. So it was a really wonderful program, and the district should be very proud of itself.
That was a wonderful interruption. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you. Other comments or things to share? All right, and now moving on to our non-staff communications, and where we get to hear from our student representatives. So we'll start with Avery, please.
Good evening. At Hall, we're having the virtual post-options fair March 2nd for seniors who are still exploring their options. Pops and Jazz is returning after a 2-year hiatus. Tickets are available on Hall's Ludus website for March 11th, 12th, the 17th, the 18th, and the 19th. Pops and Jazz, as many people know, features many performance groups at Hall, including the jazz dancers, the concert jazz band, the choraleers. And it's really quite exciting to see, for those who know, a set that has been there for 3 years finally be utilized. Unified Theater is open for spring registration. And 7 Hall students were named National Merit finalists: Andrew Chang, Samuel Foxman, David Gardner, Emma Kingwell, Ishwar Krishna, Sophie Cudler, and Charles Wang. Charles Wang was also awarded 2 silver keys by the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards. Nora Holmes received a gold key from Scholastic Art and Writing Awards. And looking forward, the Senior Class Advisory Committee is planning senior traditions like the senior outing and prom.
Thank you, Avery. Andrew?
I'll first just start by talking about, so as you all know, obviously, masks became optional in all of the schools in town. At Conard, I'd say anecdotally about 30 to 40% of students have chosen to not wear them, while I'd say a slight majority still does wear them, but it's definitely sizable both ways. And I've heard from an administrator that they think about 50% of teachers do wear them, 50% of teachers don't. And I also learned that the administration made a conscious effort to have 2 administrators wearing masks and 2 not wearing masks. And one said that students had been coming up to some of them saying that they thought it was a good move, making everyone feel comfortable, however they chose to wear a mask or not. Many sports are wrapping up winter sports, so there are state and regional and even national tournaments for some athletes. Just to highlight one sport, both boys and girls basketball made their respective state tournaments. Girls basketball played yesterday, and they lost in a very close game to Greenwich, 40-43. Boys actually has a game right now, maybe it just ended, and they're in the semifinals of the CCC championship, and they're playing Northwest Catholic, so I'll be excited to see what happened with that after this meeting. And then if they win that, then they'll obviously move on to the finals, so that's very exciting. I also learned that the boys basketball team has the winning most basketball season in Conard history with a record of 19-2. So definitely a powerhouse team this year. And then just looking ahead in some other news and reflecting on some other miscellaneous items, the Future Educators of Diversity had an equity summit recently, and I think everyone really enjoyed that. Mr. Hines said that it was very productive, and they learned a lot. And then also Conard's musical Footloose, that's opening night is the 11th, and then there will also be, and that's the 11th at 7 p.m., and there are also shows the 12th, the 18th, and the 19th also at 7 p.m., and then a 3 p.m. show on the, or 2 p.m. show on the 13th. So definitely go and see that if you can. I've been hearing it after school. I can hear the rehearsal, and it's great. So I look forward to hopefully seeing people there.
Thank you, Andrew. Boy, I'm dating myself. I remember when the original movie came out, but okay, all right. Thank you so much, both Avery and Andrew. Moving on now to future business, announcements of future meeting dates. As has been shared, on Wednesday, March the 9th, we have our budget workshop, the first one, at 7 o'clock here at the Town Hall in this room 314. Then on Tuesday, March the 15th, we will have a regular Board of Education meeting at 7 o'clock here in this room 314, followed by an executive session. And then on Wednesday, March the 23rd, 2022, Board of Education public hearing at 7 o'clock. And following that, we will go into our workshop number 2, the second workshop. All of those taking place here in room 314. Is there a request for a future agenda item? Hearing none, do we have any visitors that would like to make a comment at this time? Seeing none, we do not have an executive session at this time. Seeking a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Meeting adjourned at 8:24.